Into our From the Other Side series here as the Mountaineers continue their season this week with a matchup against Kansas State, a ranked Kansas State team, I might add, as the Mountaineers look to rebound off of a miserable loss last week. I'm your host here, Mike Asti for Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course WV Sports Now. WVU now 3-2 on the season, 500 in Big 12 play. And they now will take on a Kansas State team that's ranked 16th in the country, 4-1 on the year. But oddly, that loss is that first game of the year that I'm sure they wish they could have back at this point. And quite frankly, the Big 12 probably wishes they could have it back if the Big 12 looking for some representation into the postseason that actually means anything. For this conversation, though, I'm going to be joined by Mitchell Summers, who is a reporter at WIBW down there in near Topeka. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I'm in Topeka, just about an hour away from Manhattan.
Okay, gotcha. So covering Kansas State amongst the Chiefs and amongst everything else going down there in that market like us, but WIBW, Mitchell Summers. So I definitely appreciate the time, man, for sure. You don't have to keep calling me sir, though, I will say. I don't think I'm that much older than you, although I'm probably older than you.
It's a force of habit. I grew up in mid-Missouri. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I grew up with those values of, you have to respect anyone no matter who they're around. Even when I talk with high school kids, I'm like, yes sir, no sir, stuff like that. So.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to take offense. I'll actually take it as a compliment, but I appreciate it. But no, you don't have to make me feel too old during the show here. So Mike will work. But Mitchell Summers again from WIBW. So I do want to get things started here because these two teams are coming into this game in obviously very different mindsets. The Mountaineers are looking to kind of turn this around, what thought to be a season taking a step forward. Many around West Virginia media called last year with Neil Brown year 0 to kind of be nice, and this year being years 1 since the cover was bare. But this year, record-wise, right now maybe is not where they thought it would be, and certainly coming off of a loss that they thought maybe they would be able to get the victory on and against Texas Tech. And even the Kansas game, the Mountaineers weren't as impressive, struggling through that first half, unlike Kansas State, who dominated the Kansas Jayhawks basically like most teams. But I do want to ask you kind of what Mountaineer fans should expect out of Kansas State entering this game, because Kansas State, if you're just watching this as a casual fan or you're focusing on your team, you might be kind of confused. You look at the record, you see they're 4-1, you see they're ranked, but then you see who they lost to, you see they're able to win in the Big 12, you see that there's multiple quarterbacks that have played and started for Kansas State, and you see the big win of the year against Oklahoma that kind of shocked the world is with a quarterback who has not started the last couple games. So I guess the question would be, who is this Kansas State team that now the Mountaineers are going to face? Well, I know that's a funny question based on what I'm seeing here, but they're in a better situation.
Right. Well, they're the ultimate where there's a will, there's a way team. They're a bunch of guys that are in some way have been under-recruited or maybe not been valued as much. A lot of guys in state. I think we've got I think K-State has about 30 guys that are from Kansas that are on the roster. So in that Sunflower Showdown you just saw where they beat down KU, there was a lot of bad blood between them. So there's a lot of guys that all come in with this chip on their shoulder, and no matter who's lining up, no matter who's wearing the Power Cat logo on the side of their helmet, they're finding a way to get it done. Like you mentioned, K-State's had a bit of a quarterback issue where Skyler Thompson in the Texas Tech game, he went down with a shoulder injury or an injury of some variety. He got surgery on his upper body area. We weren't given exact details as to what went down. But
we can speculate. They're never going to tell us exactly.
Right. It was very clearly some type of shoulder injury of some variety. He had surgery on it. It's going to take him out the rest of the year. And you think at that point, like Skyler Thompson, when you look at his stats, like technically speaking, Skyler Thompson's not going to wow you, but he's a guy that's been around the scene for quite some time. Was the starter all last year and would kind of flip in and out on the final year with Coach Snyder as the starting guy. So he's just been around for so long, and he's meant so much this team for so long that when you think, well, he's gone, like that's going to be an immediate drop off. And it's been really quite the opposite. And that's kind of why I go back to this mindset of this team is there, where there's a will, there's a way. when Skyler Thompson goes down, in comes true freshman quarterback Will Howard, where his first start comes on the road against TCU, and you're thinking that, in that situation, that defense isn't gonna that a true freshman quarterback against TCU's the caliber defenses they have, it's not gonna turn out very well. But on his first drive, he rips off an 80-yard run, and I think that 80-yard run was the longest rushing play by a Kansas State player in nearly a decade, from a true freshman quarterback in his first road start in the Big 12. And on top of that, it's really been, for Kansas State, it's been this brigade of these two true freshmen that have really been special. Will Howard was a guy we were hearing in camp was going to be special, but we didn't think that he was going to play. Well, the one guy that we have been hearing a lot of and seeing a lot of lately has been Deuce Vaughn. Man, anyone that wants a chance to see what special football is about, you just turn on this guy's tape. He's a little 5'6", 160-pound dude. You see him walking in a room and you think, oh, he's not going to do anything to us. I bet I could outlift him. You think that whenever you see a guy like that. You might think that, he's not 100. He's maybe 150 pounds sopping wet.
Yeah.
But he has been one of the more special backs, not just as a true freshman, but in the country. I think right now he's leading Kansas State in receiving yardage right now, which is a bit of an indictment against the receivers, but also goes to show how special he has been as a true freshman running back to step into the Big 12. And for these past 4 games, it was really against Oklahoma where he really kind of shined and stepped out. So it's, like I said, it's been the emergence of these 2 really valuable true freshman players that you weren't expecting at the beginning of the year, that, these were going to be our guys that we're going to hang our hats on. 2 true freshmen in the Big 12 are going to lead the team to being a top 25 team and then near the tops of the Big 12. You don't expect that. But on top of that, also, it's just this scrappy bunch of dudes that have a chip in their shoulder and want to prove the rest of college football what they're about.
Well, you got to admire that, and that's definitely what college football is all about in many cases. And that is a team that maybe is, playing above expectations, certainly based on what's going on this year. Say, again, unlike the Mountaineers, who now are more venturing into territory of playing under expectations, or at least based on how the season started. Talking with Mitchell Summers, WIBW reporter covering Kansas State among what else is going on in the Kansas sports world. It does almost look like it's more of an athletic approach where you're seeing Howard get over 20 yards on the ground consistently, as well as 200-plus yards throwing through the air. So has that changed the dynamic at all of Kansas? I mean, obviously the points are still there. 38 against Oklahoma, 55 against Kansas, so the season high is just last week. Granted, take it with a grain of salt, it is Kansas. But still, I know that's a big win for you guys, but this is a Kansas team that might not get a victory at all throughout the season. And their reporter actually is who told me that when we had that preview program. But nonetheless, how has that changed the Kansas State offense when you have an athletic quarterback who's also looking to run and able to run outside the pocket? It also is a quarterback and a type of offense that it appears is not one the Mountaineers have really seen yet this season. That could be even disaster. The Mountaineers have faced Chuba Hubbard. They have faced teams that are really predicated on the ground and that ground and pound with some speed. But this is a quarterback that almost might make Mountaineer fans remember long ago with Rich Rodriguez and Pat White and company and that type of offense. Not to say that there's that much speed and that many yards, but it does appear the offense has shifted in terms of the way it could be run depending on the quarterback. Is that the case, or is that just reading into the stats?
I think it's a little bit of reading into the stats, because the thing that made Skyler Thompson a really great quarterback, in a sneaky way, was that he outside of the fact that he was just a really great leader and a durable guy, and was just always reliable in clutch situations. Outside of those things, he was pretty solid with his legs. I think it was against in the Sunflower Showdown last year, he ran for 3 touchdowns against KU, and then against whenever K-State hosted Oklahoma last year and upset them again, he ran for 4 touchdowns. So they're a team that does like to have an athletic quarterback, a guy who can be a reliable runner of the ball. It's been interesting to me to see the way that Will Howard has been run more than what I was anticipating. When you see him play, he's not he's not like.
So it's more like throwing him into the same type of offense. It's almost
Mm-hmm.
saying, go ahead, even though you're not maybe normally going to be the guy that was going to run this, we're just going to throw whoever's in there into this offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're Coach Kleiman and offensive coordinator Courtney Messingham are two guys that have been together for a long, long time, know each other really well, and are very comfortable with this scheme that they run. And it didn't matter who it was that was going to be taking snaps under center. They're going to find a way to. Well, they're not going to just put a guy out there and force a square peg into a circle hole.
Right.
But like you've seen with the stats, it's shown that obviously Will Howard is a very capable runner of the football, and their offense, like, realistically hasn't changed that much. So coming into this year, the offense, the way things have looked, have been a little bit different from what I anticipated. In that, so last year's team was very much ground and pound. They had James Gilbert, who was a running back who had a cup of coffee in the NFL for just a sec. He went to, I think, a couple training camps, I think. I don't think he had too much staying power in the league, but at least like he was a pretty solid back. And had a lot of injury problems. And they had this trio of backs that were just relied upon to kind of grind out the clock. K-State didn't really have the athletes to keep up with other teams. They just really held on to they just played keep away, essentially, played really solid defense, really solid team ball. And that's really kind of how their recipe last year. Coming into this year, the thing, I wasn't anticipating their running attack to be as productive this year. And really, outside of Deuce Vaughn, it hasn't been nearly as competitive as last year. And the big reason that being was Kansas State graduated every member of their offensive line from last year. So this offensive line this year is completely different from last year's. I know there was I think our starting left guard, or K-State's starting left guard, Josh Rivas, was a all Big 12 second team selection last year, but he was a guy that kind of rotated in and out. And so the big problem at the beginning of the year was offensive line issues, and that's played into the loss to open the season. And they also had, I think, like 20 different guys who didn't suit.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about that, and certainly WVU fans can certainly feel you on offensive line issues. The Mountaineers, obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, had one of the worst rushing attacks in all of college football last season. That's how bad it was, about 900 yards the entire year. They're already over that this year with Leddie Brown's emergence, and that a lot is the improvement of the offensive line. The offensive line, especially in college ball, if it doesn't get it done, there's almost no chance unless you have a Heisman winner, and even then. But, yeah, it looks like Deuce Vaughn had over 70 yards, but more of a spread-out attack, it seems like, on the ground for Kansas State to this point here. Talking with Mitchell Summers, WIBW reporter here, as we're covering and previewing the Mountaineers matchup with Kansas State this Saturday, another noon kickoff on Halloween. And I will say our apologies, because if WVU could have got the victory last week, that game probably would have been a really cool, maybe later on in the evening, Halloween, everyone getting excited. No, we definitely ruined that. So that's gonna be a noon kickoff. That's definitely Mountaineers' fault.
How would you power rank your Halloween candies?
Oh man, I would. That's rough. Probably Reese's Cups would be very, very high up there. I will say I'm not a candy corn guy. Candy corn is going to be way down on the list. I don't understand anyone making that a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see it every now and then, but no. Candy corn is going to be last. Reese's Cups, Snickers, something like that. That's definitely going to be high up there. I know we're considering how we're going to do trick-or-treating this year because it's happening in our neighborhood, but I always have the concern that if you can't knock on the door, first bowl, first kid, they're going to take all the candy. That's definitely what I feel like is going to happen.
If you're anticipating, well, the average, I would say, crowd of trick or treaters are going to be somewhere around like 10 years old, right? If you're anticipating someone who's 10 years old to be, I'll be nice and think about the next kid that comes. If that's what you're anticipating, it's going to be a losing.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want to tell my fiance. I really don't want to do it because I feel like it's just going to be candy for one kid and just a waste. But we'll do it anyway to be nice. But yeah, candy corn definitely at the bottom. But this game could have been a Halloween showcase. The Mountaineers maybe could have flirted with a ranking if they would have got that victory. Mountaineer fans again will digress. That did not happen. This game was a noon kickoff. Kansas State though ranked 16th. So I do want to kind of take a little bit back to what you were saying about what happened there in week 1, which we can't let Kansas State off the hook for. This is a 16th ranked team in the country, a 4-1 team undefeated in Big 12 play in a conference with a win already over Oklahoma. Oklahoma with a young quarterback and a little bit of a down year. They didn't get a lot of an off season, so that's clearly hurting them now. Baylor not looking to be what maybe some thought is a sexy pick. Oklahoma State, great. They're a top 15 team as well, but some injuries, they're certainly vulnerable, and they've proven that to this point. This could have been a really special year for Kansas State despite the injuries, and they would have had an inside track of at least the conference without, if not more, without that week 1 gap. They still certainly have a chance of the conference title being undefeated in Big 12 play, but what happened in week 1, and is there a conversation around Kansas State fans now to, based on what's happened around the landscape, week 1 could cost us a real premier bowl game because now there's no room for any other hiccups based on that would be 2 losses. The one's really, really bad, obviously.
So I'll answer this in 2 parts. So the first part about what happened week 1. So week 1, coming into the game, you could sense from the coaching staff that there was a degree of concern in that we would ask them, what's the look like of guys that are going to be able to suit up?
Right.
We're working through that. We'll see what happens week 1. So there, and that opening game, I think there was about a little over 20 guys who didn't suit up.
Yeah. Arkansas State opening game, that was a loss.
Yes. With K-State, I think about 20 guys were out with either injuries or COVID contact tracing.
Sure.
So, and the area in my opinion, I think there were 2 areas that they really struggled with the most in that game, with injuries or lack of time, I suppose. Right. The first was in the safety room. They were playing like their 4th string safety. And I forget the guy's name. I think it was like Jonathan Adams Jr. I think it was. From Arkansas State, but the receiver who had like 3 touchdowns in the red zone, all he did essentially was just like, we're gonna get inside the 10-yard line. I'm gonna box you out. I'm gonna out jump you and out physical you. So Arkansas State had this one receiver that was just
Jonathan Adams Jr. You're correct. 3 touchdowns, 35-31 win. Yep. Yeah,
he was playing out of his mind and looked like a guy who was destined to make it to the NFL, and he was doing it on. He was doing it on K-State's their senior corner, A.J. Parker, who's been around for a long time, has been a really solid guy for a long time, just had a really bad game. And after that game, they moved him from outside to nickel. And since then, it's been a pretty solid transition. I think he's in the top 5 in the Big 12 in terms of passes defense this year. I think he's got like 4 or something like that. Okay. They completely changed the secondary. Week 1, I think they were playing without. They might have been playing without their safety, Jerron McPherson, and the next week they completely retooled everything. They moved. They had a bye week in between Arkansas State and OU, but in that time period, they moved A.J. Parker inside. They started Justin Gardner, who's now leading the Big 12 in passes defense. And they also moved in another guy, Echo Boydo, and Jerron.
I imagine dealing with COVID also, that was a blessing in disguise to be able to have that week off for the contact tracing, and that would be the quarantine. So
yes, having that 1 week to kind of to reassess and to reevaluate everything, get everyone back on the same path was really influential in what happened the next week against Oklahoma. Where outside of the first half was pretty yikes. I was anticipating that it was going to be another blowout loss. But outside after the first, I think Spencer Rattler either had 3 of his passing touchdowns or all 4 of his passing touchdowns in the first half. I forget exactly.
Okay.
But in the second half, K-State secondary really locked down, and Jerron McPherson ended up making a game-ending interception. So the secondary is really, as a whole, has really improved its play. They gave up in the first 2 weeks. Well, first 2 weeks they gave up 5 passing touchdowns against Arkansas State and 4 against Oklahoma. And ever since then, they've only given up 2. So their secondary is really locked down and changed. And the other part was their offensive line. It's difficult to quantify how difficult how much problems their offensive line was having week 1. And again, like I mentioned before, the way that K-State liked to play offense is all primarily based off their run game. It's all pound and pound. And Skyler Thompson was playing at the time, and Skyler Thompson is a good quarterback, but is he a guy that you want to pass the ball 30 times a game? Is he a guy that is going to, if the running game is completely taken out, is he a guy that is going to light up secondaries consistently? And that's a pretty resounding no. You saw that last year, and whenever West Virginia came to Manhattan, outside of the very first play, where the long touchdown pass to Dalton Schoen in the first drive. Outside of that, Skyler Thompson threw 2 interceptions, including the game-ending interception. So he's a guy that you don't want to, and they feel kind of the same.
And that was a worse Mountaineers defense. I mean, prior to last week, the Mountaineers defense was actually ranked number 1 in the country, as surprising as that may sound. And that's something for a tidbit for Kansas State fans who weren't aware. That's how well this Mountaineer defense was playing up until last week, most of this season. They did struggle a lot last year, and everyone knows the controversy of this offseason and changing, getting rid of Vic Koenig and having kind of an offensive or defensive coordinator situation by committee. The defense was playing well above expectations and well above all that controversy prior to last week. So it is a different Mountaineer team that Kansas State is facing as well, despite a similar attack with a different quarterback. But yeah, offensive lines are a big deal, more so in college ball than really anything, but obviously a big deal in general in football. And an offensive line, it needs to be different depending on the type of quarterback. If you have a running quarterback, the offensive line needs to be one way. If you have a ground and pound team, it needs to be another way. So that definitely could be a factor. I do want to ask, as we kind of pivot away from week 1, eventually I'll get away from week 1 for you.
Sure.
Obviously Kansas State opens up the year with that loss. They then turn around and get the big win. And even though I think the country knew Oklahoma wasn't going to necessarily be a playoff team, they were rebuilding a little bit despite having tons of talent. This was probably not a Heisman winning quarterback like they've had going into seemingly every year, but it still was a shocking final score. This is still Oklahoma, and to do that again, and to do that after what happened in week 1. So I do kind of want to ask, I hear all the injuries, I hear COVID, so maybe the casual fan or maybe the national media or the overall fan that's not a Kansas State fan, maybe they weren't aware of what Kansas State was going to be this year. But what were the expectations for this Kansas State team entering the season? Obviously not knowing what was going to happen with these injuries, but taking even COVID into consideration prior to week 1, what did you think Kansas State could do this year? Because it appears that they kind of have snuck up on the rest of the country. Is it a team that's been sneaking up on you and your colleagues and Kansas State fans, or is maybe week 1 more the aberration and you felt this team could be a top 20 team?
Well, I had a lot of concerns about the offensive line, and I thought that was going to be what was going to be their downfall at the end of the day. I thought Kansas State was going to be roughly about what they were last year, and being just a really frisky team that was really well coached and they're still kind of trying to get their guys in their system. This is only year or 2 of the Kleiman era, and as much as last year was a resounding success, 8 wins, the most by a first-year coach in Kansas State history, and whenever you're breaking records that a guy like Bill Snyder was never able to do, that's you got something special. And it was that team that won 8 games and made it to a bowl game is essentially the same roster that Bill Snyder had, and I think 5-7, something like that. but that team had a lot of struggles. So coming into this year, I think Kansas State fans, admittedly, I would say that Kansas State fans always have really high expectations for themselves. Sometimes maybe they need to drink their own coffee a little less, I would say.
Okay, thoughts of grandeur. Yes, I'm familiar with the fans. Yes.
Right. So I think coming into this season, fans at minimum expected another bowl appearance. I think if they would have got less than 8 wins, they would have felt disappointed. Considering that.
Did that change at all then after week 1? Did fans kind of jump off the wagon and say, oh, we gauged this team wrong, it's not in our cards, we're going to have a bad year? And then they jump back on the wagon when the winning starts to happen, which is very, very common, obviously, for sports fans? Or did they think that, oh, my God, week 1's just shocking to us, we're clearly going to rebound, and then the Oklahoma win was not shocking? Because, again, that was surprising nationally.
Yeah, I think fans after week 1 were definitely like, what's going on with our defense? Like, Kansas State had lost their defensive coordinator he went to Michigan State. So they had a new defensive coordinator coming into this year, and people were like, well, what the heck? We just gave up how many points to who exactly?
Yeah, Arkansas State.
What is that? Yeah. What makes a red wolf better than a normal wolf? Right. You know? So after week 1, fans were definitely sell on the stocks. Yeah. And you come into a game against Oklahoma where Kansas State is a team there's a lot of teams that you can see walking off the bus that they would be intimidated by in Oklahoma. There's a lot of teams where you can just see that walking off the bus. Kansas State is a team that does not have any fear of Oklahoma. There's last year the Sooner skips schooner tipping gifts were going crazy. Last year it was not to the same level coming into this year. But still, there was this degree of like, we did it last year, but I just saw Spencer Rattler, and the
wheels fall off Oklahoma literally when they play Kansas State. It appears.
Right, exactly. So a lot of people were kind of like cautiously optimistic, but they were trying to be like the realistic Big 12 fan of like, oh, it's Oklahoma. They're gonna be another special team. And after the first half, it was looking the part. I forget the score at the end of the half, but K-State was definitely down by, I think, 2 or 3 scores. Yeah. People were definitely sell on all the stocks at that point. And now here K-State is. I think what the box scores might not say about Kansas State is I really genuinely think outside of like the receivers are still struggling right now. I think they've only thrown 1 passing touchdown to a receiver thus far this year. It's all gone to tight ends and running backs. So the receivers are really struggling. But outside of that, like this, K-State is probably one of the more complete teams in college football right now, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, I was gonna kind of go in that direction then. So obviously Kansas State now here in the present day, we get by from week 1. They get the big win Oklahoma. They keep on winning here. Kansas State now sits at 4-1, 4 Big 12 conference victories, number 16 in the country, depending on what poll you're looking at here. And again, speaking with Mitchell Summer, WIBW reporter, previewing the Mountaineers game with Kansas State. The Mountaineers looking to rebound. They're 3-2 on the year. Kansas State again riding high. But I do want to ask you, just how good is Kansas State really, though? Because I think we're going to find this out. Kansas State, you have to give them credit. They're 4-1. They're number 16. And especially with what's going on the rest of the conference, they deserve the spot. They certainly are the team that has right now an inside track at vying for that conference title. But WVU is a game that certainly is no guarantee victory for Kansas State, even though the Mountaineers are playing a little bit below what they were earlier in the season, and right now we're coming off of a disappointing loss. But then you go the rest of the schedule, WVU is going to be basically one of the easier games they have the rest of the season, which really isn't good news. Oklahoma State is coming up after the Mountaineers with Chuba Hubbard, who, again, is starting to find his footing. The offensive line is starting to protect. He's not still putting up tons of great yardage, but he can be a beast, and you saw what he did last year with 2,000-plus yards, and us later figure out that he was hurt, as amazing as that sounds. Iowa State, who's a ranked team, Baylor, who can play tough and was a sexy pick for some teams coming into the season for some people, And then Texas, who they keep shouting they're back. They really aren't back, but I will say they still certainly can get wins every now and then on any given Saturday. So that's a tough schedule moving forward, where we're going to really find out who the real Kansas State team is. So how do you expect this Kansas State team to play the rest of the year? Because right now they're number 16, but I could easily see 2 to 3 losses the rest of this season, which would kind of get them back down to earth and kind of ruin a little bit of this earlier season success.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that sticks out most to me in things we were mentioning with how this next stretch will be is I don't think Kansas State has really had to play an elite running back just yet. A guy who is a workhorse thumper.
That's happening. That's happening.
Yeah, that's 100% happening with Leddie Brown, of course, coming this week, and then Chuba, and then Brees down the line.
Right.
So, So this Kansas State's Kansas State hasn't really had to face a really elite running back. And the Sunflower Showdown, I think Velton Gardner is a solid running back for KU. I think he's a really solid running back. Is he a Poku Williams? No. So that was one area, one time where they got to dodge having to play an elite running back was this past week. And Sharodrick Thompson's technically one of the statistical leaders up there in the Big 12 in terms of rushing yardage, but still, he was kind of put in a situation where Alan Bowman got injured in the very beginning part of that football game in Texas Tech. And at that point, K-State just started teeing off. And so K-State has a really solid defensive line, and they have, in my opinion, one of the best secondaries in the Big 12. And they have Wyatt Hubert, who is one of the best defensive ends in the country. So they have. I don't question at all their pass defense. I haven't seen them play a real thumper, a guy who has home run hitting ability, a guy who can be a workhorse, 20 plus carries a game, a do-it-all kind of back, like these 3 backs that we mentioned. So I'm really interested to see how K-State handles that. I don't think K-State's linebacking core has really been challenged so much just yet from that perspective of not having to have an elite running back to have to worry about trying to corral. Yeah. I don't think their interior line has really been attacked that much just yet. I think the last year K-State lost a couple of pretty solid interior defensive linemen that were really valuable for a long time, and their interior defensive line is a little bit slimmer, I would say. Last year's was a little bit bulkier, more run defenders. I'm interested. That's where I would say the balloon could be deflated. The air could get out of the balloon, and everything kind of starts getting out of control whenever we'll first see an experience with Leddie Brown and how they're able to handle that situation. And if it gets out of hand, then just looking forward to Chuba and then Brees, it's going to become something that's more problematic.
Yeah, and Leddie Brown certainly can burst it. He's had some big runs throughout the season. He's been the best player for the Mountaineers most of the season consistently, I would certainly say. And based on Jarrett Doege's struggles last week against Texas Tech, I would not be surprised, certainly based on what you're saying, and I'm sure Neil Brown's studying this tape, they're probably going to try tons of Leddie Brown early in this game and maybe take the ball out of Jarrett Doege's hands, make this more a running game. And if the Mountaineers can get a lead, then that could be a problem for Kansas State. But of course, that secondary for Kansas State could make this a tough day again for Jarrett Doege, who is certainly prone to making mistakes and getting in his head a little bit. So that could maybe be an advantage for Kansas State here. Mitchell Summers, WIBW here, previewing the Mountaineers game with Kansas State. I do want to kind of round things out, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, I guess, in the last segment. But Kansas State has a tough road coming up. So do the Mountaineers. They both are with second-year head coaches. They're both looking to rebuild the program. Cover maybe a little fuller with Kansas State last year than it was for the Mountaineers. But this year, both teams feel like they have their guys. Granted, Kansas State dealing with more injuries and having played better to this point as well. But if Kansas State gets this victory and continues their success, what happened? And number two, if they don't and they lose, what happened? And this is a big game for Kansas State, I would even say, moving on for their season, because if you lose to Oklahoma State, I'd imagine from a Kansas State perspective, you don't want to lose, but you can say, okay, that's an elite team. That's a Heisman candidate. that's a loss we can handle. You would be losing to an unranked Mountaineer team, and now with the Big Ten having teams play and all these different teams involved now in the rankings, that if Kansas State would take an unranked loss going in at 16, they would probably be flirting with the latter half of the top 25 of being ranked at all, based on what the Mountaineers just did. So a lot goes into this game. But what does Kansas State need to do, and what occurs if they get a win? And then if the wheels fall off and this ends up being a Kansas State team that when you're talking to somebody else next week, if somebody else asks you to help them preview that this is a Kansas State team that's not even ranked, what occurred? Is it just Leddie Brown goes off, or is there anything else you could see for Kansas State?
Y'all's defensive line could be a massive problem.
Right. The Still brothers, for sure.
Say that one more time.
The Still brothers, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Y'all's defensive line is really special, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head. TCU, of course, has a good defense, but I don't think that I don't think a guy like the Stills brothers, and Darius in particular, a guy that's definitely going to be playing on Sundays.
Yeah.
So I don't think K-State has had that type of a guy they've had to work with yet. The offensive line's been playing a lot better, but still you're running into a situation where you have multiple guys that West Virginia that y'all can rotate in. And that defensive line against an offensive line that I have yet to see really get challenged yet, I think could be another area that could be really problematic. K-State, something that has been something they've been relying upon a lot, and one of the reasons why I say they're a really complete football team is that their special teams is ridiculously elite. I think every game this year so far they've at least blocked a punt or a kick. So, and this last week, Phillip Brooks, I mean, he's still running because KU's punt coverage team was struggling.
Yeah.
189 punt return yards, 2 touchdowns. Special teams player of the week in the Big 12, obviously. Broke a single game punt return record for K-State, a record that stood since the late 90s. So,
yeah. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean,
right.
Not many teams have 3 sides of the ball. A lot of people forget about special teams, but it
right.
certainly could be a big advantage if that's going. And I just
right.
know from covering the Steelers in the NFL that they've had no special teams really success until a couple weeks ago, and that's been a big problem. So that's a nice advantage for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the obviously their special teams has been really consistent and something they can rely upon, but there's a reason why special teams in a sense gets lost in the fold, because if you're trying to be a team that's going to win on special teams, it's not going to be.
There's luck involved.
Right. So I think K-State has really had to rely upon their running game has really been reliant upon Deuce Vaughn. And if he kind of can't get going, and then you're asking a true freshman and Will Howard, who's been pretty solid, but to now making his 3rd start in the Big 12. And if you've got a defensive line in West Virginia that's teeing off on him, knowing that, we don't have to worry about a Deuce Vaughn, it could be a really problematic scene. That's a lot you're asking out of a guy making his 3rd career start. So what that means, what a win would mean for K-State is that, it's Coach Kleiman is the coach of the future. He's the guy that we know. He is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What a loss would mean, people would still be, people in the Little Apple adore Chris Kleiman for good reasons. He's just getting to know him at least a little bit, a really quality human being, the way he runs his program, the way the guys respect him, the way the guys talk about him. He has the 100% respect of everyone.
Unwavering, undying. Yeah. It sounds very parallel to the Mountaineers with Neil Brown, honestly.
Right. So would a question start to come? People would be frustrated that, it's been back-to-back years. You lose to West Virginia. That's kind of frustrating. Then, if that moves forward to next week and you start losing to Oklahoma State. That's back-to-back years. We've lost to Oklahoma State.
And then you're 4-3. Yeah.
Right. So things, it gets dicey as more time goes by. Still, this locker room respects Coach Kleiman to a degree that I think it would be really difficult for people to start having conversations about, hey, Coach Kleiman, are we sure we're drinking the right Kool-Aid right now? And still the level, and I think 2 weeks ago it was that athletic director Gene Taylor worked out an extension on Coach Kleiman's contract. So they're sold on this experience, and thus far it's been working out pretty well.
Yeah, it definitely has, and it's very, very similar to what's going on with WVU and Neil Brown. And this conference is littered with a lot of young coaches who maybe are going to be around these programs for years to come and have a long leash to be able to have success. I mean, Neil Brown, it sounded like just I could say the same thing about Neil Brown from what you're talking about of media and fans liking Coach Kleiman. Neil Brown is very beloved, very, very nice. He went out of his way to send videos of sorrow to journalists who were furloughed during COVID initially last spring. I mean, he has gone out of his way to be a nice guy and seems to very much fit in with the community. But unlike Coach Kleiman, eventually you got to keep getting the W's. And while there's a long leash based on certainly the off season, Shane Lyons very much in lockstep with Neil Brown. He let him handle the entire Koenig situation, which is rare for, at that time, a coach who'd only been there a year in a pretty bad season to be able to just run what's going to happen. But that's the case. They definitely want success. So it sounds very similar. But Kansas State a little bit further ahead in terms of that rebuild. The cupboard might have been a little fuller despite injuries, and they're able to get victories against teams they should at least be to this point. The Mountaineers have laid some eggs so far. So it makes them hungrier to turn it around. We will see which one can do that, a big game for both of these two teams, to say the least. And again, apologies from the Mountaineer perspective. This game is going to be a noon kickoff with an early wake-up for all of us because the Mountaineers weren't able to get it done last week. But nonetheless, Kansas State needs this win as they move towards a tougher schedule than even WVU, certainly moving forward. So Mitchell Summers, I definitely appreciate the time, man. I definitely appreciate it. Quickly, what's your Candy Power rankings? You asked me. Give me a top 5 here as we get close to closing this off.
Well, my guilty pleasure is Reese's peanut butter cups.
Okay.
I usually go to Walmart and get the big bag of the like 100 of the minis, and I'll keep
I'm
those.
with you then. Okay.
Right. So Reese's are really high up there. Butterfingers.
That's underrated.
Yes.
Okay.
And Twix. Those would be
Twix is there.
some variety in my top 3 without a doubt are those 3. I'm a chocolate guy.
Okay. What's the one piece of candy though that if you see in there and when you were trick or treating as a kid, you're like, this is not getting it done? Like, what's happening?
Tootsie Rolls. Tootsie Rolls. 100%. Tootsie Rolls. I like Tootsie Pops until you get to the Tootsie Roll in the center.
Okay.
And at that point, it's just this is not what I want. Can I just have the sucker? Can we get past this awful, disgusting mess in the middle? It's like I don't like the consistency. I don't like the taste. It's like it looks like it's supposed to be chocolate, but it's not. It's weird and gooey, and I don't like it.
Okay. I hear that. You do not like it. You have a personal problem with Tootsie Rolls. It's fine.
I do. Okay. I have a vendetta.
Okay. The worst things can be going on in life if Tootsie Rolls are the top issue. But, I hear you. I'm not really a big Tootsie Roll guy either. I think candy corn, though, I hate more than Tootsie Rolls. If I had to do a ranking of candy I hate the most in Halloween, that's maybe overrated. I'm sick of seeing candy corn on people's lists on Twitter. I don't want to see that anymore. But I'm going to unfollow anybody that's ranking candy corn number 1. Let me put it that way. But nonetheless, I absolutely appreciate the time. Again, Mitchell Summers from WIBW down there in Kansas for Kansas State, their game against WVU. Kansas State coming in 4-1, number 16 in the country. The Mountaineers 3-2, and missed an opportunity to really be ranked last week. So, Mitchell, I definitely appreciate the time. Absolutely want to remind all of you out there to hit us up with family of networks all through Pittsburgh Sports Now, of course, WV Sports Now. Follow us on Twitter at WV Sports Now, at PGH Sports Live. And bottom of the video here, it's easy to do so. The button says subscribe. Hit it. It's free to do so, actually, so it can certainly help us get the content to you guys even easier than we are already. So again, Mitchell, I definitely appreciate it. So Mitchell Summers of WIBW for all of us through the Now Network and, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti, and it's going to be a spooky time, I guess you could say, between the Mountaineers and Kansas State. I don't know if that foreshadows positive outcomes for WVU or not, but Halloween games, college football on Halloween, it's cool to have it, even if it's at noon, so I guess can't complain too much.